Hi there. Welcome to a series of videos called English for Emerson. We've been talking about early American history, and today we're talking about the Revolutionary War. I don't think there's a whole lot of point in studying a lot of this historical stuff, to be honest. Not unless you can apply it to your own life. And that's what I'm going to try to do today. I hope I'm successful. You can learn a lot from George Washington. Not because he was the president of the United States, not because he's on Mount Rushmore, not because he was some big hero. You can learn a lot from George Washington because he overcame disasters and failures. Do you know George Washington had horrible failures? He lost his battles in the beginning. But the thing is he learned from it. He was able to adjust. And that's what you can take from history. History repeats itself. And it teaches us things if we apply it to our own experience. What I'm trying to impress upon you from George Washington is that sometimes in life, the most important thing you can do is to back up. You can admit defeat and retreat and survive. Sometimes you have to take losses and run. Sometimes you have to take losses and run. That's what George Washington did. And if you don't, you risk complete catastrophe, complete defeat. Survival is victory, people. That's what I'm trying to teach in this lesson, and that's what George Washington can teach us, okay? He lost the first battle of the Revolutionary War. King George III did the same thing he'd done in previous wars. He hired German mercenaries. I'll put mercenaries up on the screen. What's that mean? It means professional soldiers. They get paid big bucks to fight. He hired German mercenaries. And he amassed also British soldiers and a huge navy. And they sailed to New York in the summer of 1776. And in late August of 1776, George Washington's army and the British army and the mercenaries had a huge battle on Long Island, New York. And the Americans got their butts kicked. I mean, it was a disaster. The revolution was almost over with the first battle. The British army was almost twice as big. They were twice as good. And they had much better equipment. The Americans were helpless. And they had to run. And George Washington basically, in his army, they sacrificed about 400 men who charged the British position. Basically, almost all of these soldiers died, and the rest all ran and escaped to the East River, which separated Long Island from Manhattan. And as darkness fell, they found fishing boats from local fishermen and things like this, and they all got aboard these boats, and they rowed across the East River to escape to Manhattan. This is about 9,000 American soldiers that were left after this horrible battle. As the sun came up the next morning, they were still escaping across the East River, and luckily for them, a huge bank of fog came over the East River and basically blanketed over the river so the British couldn't see them and shoot them as they were in their rowboats, and they were all able to escape across and run from the British army. And George Washington, he had to think about it. It's like, oh my God, my army is not good enough to defeat the British. They're better than us and bigger than us. What are we going to do? How am I going to win this war? Because we're toast. This is not good. And so he came up with a new strategy. And this is what I'm trying to share with you. You got to adapt in life. You can't just face all your battles head to head. If you know that you're going to lose, you got to come up with a new strategy. And his new strategy was to have strategic retreat, meaning they were going to keep running away. And, retreat is not defeat. Backing up is not defeat. It's simply giving you time. And George Washington realized that time was his biggest ally because the British were way away from home. Their home was on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Same thing with the Germans. They didn't want to be over there in America fighting away from home for too long. They wanted it to be fast. George Washington said, no, I'm going to drag this thing out. I'm going to take my time. Patience is power. This is something I've had to learn in my life. Oh my God, I have no patience. But patience is power. Time can be your best friend if you are patient. Survival. If you survive, you're still alive. That's what George Washington decided. And so he decided to take his troops and basically run to the south and draw the British Army away from their 100 ships out there in the harbor, get away from that naval support, stretch out their supply lines so they couldn't get easily food and ammunition, and basically do little surprise attacks, and then run away and keep running to the south and draw that big British army further and further and further into America and wear them down. That's what he did. I mean, if you think about it, the British Army was over 20,000 men. They have horses and all these young men. They eat a lot. How are they going to get all that food and all those supplies for all those horses for months and months and months? Well, it takes a lot of effort. It takes supply lines. You have to keep transporting stuff with wagons for all these troops. George Washington thought, I'm going to wear them down. The longer they're here, the weaker they're going to get. The longer this goes on, the stronger my army is going to get because they're going to get more experience. We're going to teach them how to fight. Do you follow me? Besides, the Americans knew the countryside and the British didn't, so they could launch little surprise attacks because they knew how to get away. They knew the surrounding countryside and where to go to escape. And they followed this strategy for months. And finally, on Christmas night of 1776, it was bitter cold, and they were all camped on the Delaware River, south, about 100 miles south of New York. And the British army was on one side of the river, and the American army was on the other side of the river. And George Washington could hear the British and the Germans over there partying on Christmas night, and he organized an attack. He got rowboats, and he got about 2,500 soldiers, I think, and they rowed across the Delaware River, which had ice floating in it. It was so cold out there. And they got to the other side in the middle of the night. And the next morning, they launched a surprise attack on these soldiers of the British and the Germans who had been partying all night and who were fast asleep. It was the first victory of the Revolutionary War on December 26th, 1776. And it was a huge turning point for the revolution because for those first few months, it looked like it was not going to go well. But with this victory, the tide began to turn. Things began to look up for the Americans because they had proof that George Washington's new strategy was really going to work. They were going to draw those British troops further into America. They were going to launch surprise attacks and then run away. They were not going to fight head to head and try to conquer them in some great big, battle. No, they were going to basically what you would say, whittle away at them. They were going to just defeat them one little battle at a time and wear them down. And the strategy began to work. Listen, the dates and the names and the places are not so important. What's important is that our first president of this country, George Washington, and the hero of the Revolutionary War, he was smart. He did not defeat the British with strength. He defeated them with brains, with smarts. He knew that he could not defeat the British army in a head-to-head battle. He knew that he had to use time and patience and retreat to win. Sometimes in life, when you're having a difficult situation, this is what I'm trying to impress upon Emerson and my viewers, okay? Sometimes in life, when you're having difficulties, the worst thing that you can do is to try to use force and just force your way to win. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is back up and retreat and escape. Because there's an old saying, I'll put it up on the screen. The saying is, live to fight another day. That's what George Washington's philosophy was against the British. They were too big, and they were too strong, and they were too good. His strategy was live to fight another day. The longer this war goes on, he realized, the better it is for America, because we're all here. We have every family, every house. They're going to help us out all over this countryside. They're not going to help out the British. It's going to be hard for the British to stay here and have a long war. It's going to be a lot easier for us. Let's use patience and time as our greatest allies. And that's what he did. And things started to look a lot better for the Americans after that victory, the day after Christmas in 1776. And we'll see you next time on English for Emerson. Bye-bye.